Welcome to The Wobbly Middle, a podcast for women rethinking their careers in midlife. Hi, Dolly. Thanks for
Hi.
coming today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm speaking to you in a week where you can't cross the road for being run down by a bus advertising The Devil Wears Prada 2. It's been 20 years since we first met Anne Hathaway's character, Andy Sachs. And that was right at about the time you were editing Vogue online. Can you take us back to that world?
Yes, it's amazing how many people have asked me in my life whether my job was very like The Devil Wears Prada. Well, in the last 20 years, that question has been prolific. And the answer is, I'm afraid, yes, a lot of it was similar. In fact, I did see the second film the other day, and I felt uncomfortable, partly the nostalgia I feel uncomfortable with because it's so far away from me now, that part of my life. There's a little bit, I've always felt discomfort in nostalgia, but I also feel discomfort with the fact that I was in the thick of an industry that is basically, I now look back with hindsight and see it was trying to sell things to people that they didn't need. And it was to make people, well, it made people feel uncomfortable if they didn't look a certain way or feel part of a certain set. But there was also, I recognised a lot of the beauty and the creativity and the fun. I mean, the ridiculous fun. The aspirational nature of that industry is completely and utterly founded on truth.
But I'm interested to know what you think has changed. It's a big question.
I think it's a really interesting question. I've changed, certainly. I think having children, and now they are 11 and 13, and we talk obviously a lot about screen time and the benefits or not therein. And I remember that I was creating a website and growing social media channels for Vogue, which were trying to encourage our audience, as big an audience as possible, to be online as often as possible for as long as possible. I have a sense of responsibility now that I didn't have then. And I don't feel ashamed of it because in the context of the media environment then, we didn't then know that future learnings, but certainly that is on my conscience. Have magazines changed? No, I don't think so. If you read them, it's the same sense of trying to be first with a story, the same sense of elegance and aesthetic and quality. I think the appetite has changed because we're all scrolling through our phones and seeing so much so quickly that perhaps sitting down with a magazine feels like, I certainly don't find I have time.
But it is a treat.
But it is a treat. But gosh, if I had a treat, if I had time to spend half an hour doing something that was a treat, I would probably want to call you and chat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than sit down. It would be a treat, but it might not be the first thing I come to because life is so busy. There are other priorities, maybe.
Yeah. I think that nostalgia thing is interesting, especially because in the news there's been the demise of, or certainly there's been a big cull at Glamour magazine. And Glamour did try to respond. It went digital in 2018. That was probably still in your time at Condé Nast. And I wonder where you see the magazine going.
It's amazing to have this conversation today. Yesterday, I was at the funeral of Mrs. Burstein, who was the founder of Brown's, which is a incredible fashion emporium on South Morton Street in Mayfair. And she was an incredible person. She turned 100 earlier this year, and we were going to have her birthday party in Claridge's, where she frequented in July. But sadly, shortly after her birthday, she died. Anyway, at her funeral yesterday, the great and the good of the old school fashion world were there. It was absolutely extraordinary. And life is really different now, but the creativity and the enthusiasm and the elite feeling of fashion was very much in force yesterday. Where the magazines go, if I knew that, it would be impossible to say. But I remember when we talked about, because when Glamour was moved to digital first, I was then content and strategy director of Condé Nast. I'd left Vogue then and I'd been promoted into the kind of job that was across the portfolio. So there were many discussions as to how Glamour would change as it went digital first. And we discussed possibly turning it into a sort of emulation of a British version of Teen Vogue, which was very much the voice of the younger woman and the leading conversations, the moral conversations and the Me Too movements and the major loud female-led empowering conversations of the time. And the decision was, because this was a commercial decision, because it had to continue to make money to employ everybody so they could stop culling them, was to go with a beauty-led title because, of course, that was going to bring the advertisers in. And I thought that was a great shame that the commercial requirements should lead the content. I can see why. It's very difficult to get people to advertise on conversations around conversations that may otherwise feel contentious or bring to mind conversations that include people who may be connected with the advertisers. But I thought it was a great shame. And I think that those conversations lead digital engagement and audiences with a greater longevity.
You'd been at Vogue for about 12 years when you had your first babe.
Yes, about that. Yes.
And that catapulted you into something completely different, which ultimately ended up in your book, Leaving the Ladder Down.
Yes, that's right.
How did you feel leaving something so fast moving? You know, the fear that it might move on without you. Were you afraid of that?
Absolutely, I was. And I think lots of people are, but it's not spoken about. I loved my job. I felt, 12 years running Vogue.com and building the team and going to all the shows internationally and really being in the thick of the sort of front line of the fashion, these extraordinary creative people. I was worried, not actually from losing my place in the industry, but in Vogue, certainly. Because people kind of have a little cupcake party for you and say, bye, have a lovely break. And don't worry about us, we'll carry on here. And it's like it's almost like leaving a baby and the babysitter not taking any notice of the instructions about this is what the baby will want to eat or what time they want to sleep or all of that. And I was like, no, I'm not worried about it, but I'd like to have a conversation about how and when I'm in touch. And it was sort of, it felt like it was assumed I was just fading away. And I was 100% planning to come back with as much enthusiasm and dedication as ever. So that was quite odd. But then when I did come back, you feel up and running. Yeah, first of all, I was with the baby for about 5 months, and then I was terrified of coming back because I didn't realize how worried I'd be about leaving him. But then you get over that. And then when I did get back to the office, I felt up and running very rapidly, which is a really nice surprise and I think is common to lots of people in the book.
Yeah, it is common, and it's wonderful to be back using your brain in that way.
Yeah.
There was so much in your book about the complexity of feelings around everything we know of modern motherhood. And when I took some time off, my children were a bit older, I felt very resentful of the daily chores that needed to be done because I got zero dopamine, adrenaline hit from doing anything. It didn't give me a buzz, the same buzz that I'd had. So when I go back to doing something, go back in the office, it feels really good to finish things, to achieve things, to
work with other adults.
Yeah. And there was just lots in your book, lots of moments where that conflict plays out the whole time. We do make choices to stay at home, various parts in our life, or to work more flexibly, and that's really important for us. But just because you're making a choice, it doesn't mean that it is a perfect fit.
No, absolutely. And there's something to acknowledge. Last night, as I say, I was at this funeral and it felt, despite I was close to Mrs. B, whose funeral it was, and so it was a very emotional day. But then I was also suddenly back in the thick of all these fashion people who I hadn't seen for some time. It felt similar to a working sort of event. And then I was late home. And then I dashed in and my husband was abroad and I had to cook supper and my children have exams this week. So I literally ran in the door, ripped off my funeral garb, stuck on some jeans and a top, started to cook supper, started to help with revision, provided dinner, read to them both so that they got to bed on time and slept well. All of that is work. And my husband did say at one point I was not working during lockdown. And I was feeling incredibly low because I felt I wasn't achieving or contributing and putting too much pressure on him financially and losing a sense of myself somehow because I was homeschooling the children and, holding that part of life together. And he said, if we were paying somebody else to do what you have done today, that would have been expensive. So why don't you sort of mentally give yourself 50 quid every time you cook lunch and 60 quid every time you give them a bath? And by the end of the week, you can kind of tot up quite a good income. And it was weirdly helpful. It was weird that sort of self-validation, albeit a lie, it made me realize how much validation I get from professional work and how little validation I give myself for literally what I did last night, changing costume as soon as I got in the door and providing all this stuff that is really valuable. And if you paid somebody else to do it, would be really costly.
I think it's hard for us to give ourselves that validation when it's not reflected by the rest of the world.
Yes. Yes, and I think, we get caught in this bind of if we work, we're not being a very good parent. And if we're parenting, we're not being a very ambitious or professional colleague. And we wonder why that is. And in the book, I quote Mary Beard quite a lot from her Women in Power manifesto. And she talks in that about in the 4th century BC, I think, Aristophanes making a joke about the idea that, one day women think they might, be in a position of power. And I think there is a very deep-rooted cultural assumption that maybe we shouldn't be working. Maybe all this self-doubt is based on the fact that I am doing the wrong thing. So we have to work hard to make conversations more cheerful and open and celebratory about working parents, because it's brilliant. It's so fantastic with that feeling of euphoria that you have when you're working and the children are in good shape and, you've had a good journey to work and work's going well and the sun's shining and you like what you're wearing and you're like, God, I'm absolutely invincible. And it's not every day, but there are days like that make you think everything is possible. And they help fuel the survival of the more challenging days. But it was that euphoria I was trying to get in the book from all the different women I spoke to, because to change this sort of prevailing reputation of a working parent, of being knackered and stressed and having porridge in my hair and my children are miserable and my relationship's breaking down and I'm failing at work as well, because actually that looks quite good on screen sometimes in the various brilliant, hilarious comedy series, but it's not reflective of what we're doing every day.
And also the impact on our relationships. When you feel that you've done something fulfilling in a day, then that has such a positive overflow on the rest of your relationships.
Absolutely. Like if you fail at anything and then it, underpins your mood for the day and therefore how you interact with, your family or your colleagues. If you're feeling good about yourself because you've achieved, you ride high on that, and so does everybody else around you. And you can see that reflected in, even when the book came out, my children, are more excited about it than I was. And therefore, I hope that means that they'll go, I want to do that one day, not necessarily write a book, but whatever achievements are in their head in terms of daydreams, that things can come true.
Yes, your personal experience is very much woven into this book. And we spoke about physical magazines and just holding this, there's something about holding a book. It's very restorative, sort of nourishing. I do like a hard copy. And then I opened it and it said, in memory of my father, Hume Jones, who used to say there's no such word as can't. I just found it very emotional reading that about your dad, because I know he used to write to you once a week, as did my dad.
Did he?
And there's so much overflow about how we raised and then how we parent. And that's so mixed up in how we judge ourselves.
Yeah.
Something else about your dad. He wrote to you about friendship.
Yes.
Which seems for. Do you mind reading what he wrote to you?
No, gosh, I hope it won't make me cry. So he used to write to me, as you say, every week I was at boarding school, and he wrote me a letter in 2002, I think. And there wasn't any particular reason for this sort of life lecture he gave me, but there were just some really fundamental pieces of advice. And on friendship, as you say, he said, keep calling friends who like you very much, even if they appear standoffish. They are not really, but lead busy lives and don't get round to things. I've always found that I've had to work on friends just as I do clients, in a different way, of course, but it needs doing.
I thought that's quite unconventional for a man of his time to speak to you about investing in friendships.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
I wish he was alive so I could really investigate that with him.
So many men, and I don't want to, generalize too much, but so many of them have their 3 best friends from school.
Yes, it's interesting.
For the rest of their lives. And I just think of the richness of community in women and that friendship building and how in your book you talk about the importance of just these shared experiences. Our fact patterns are all different, but knowing that your experience is valid, women are so much better at talking.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, my father was an estate agent and we lived in Hampshire. He sold sort of big country houses and estates and things. And if somebody was going to sell their big country house and estate, he needed them to know him and like him. So he networked all the time. And his job was very much, the social life was combined within the job. He and my mother would go to endless dinner parties. And my mother considered her part of his work because she was, chatting people up and generally being interesting and entertaining at these dinner parties, which would eventually lead to a sale. And so, in fact, when he died, we had his memorial service and 1,300 people came.
Wow,
it was standing room only in Winchester Cathedral. And he was an estate agent. He wasn't a sort of, figure of state or whatever. And I think because people really liked him and he did, clients were like friends and clients became friends and friends became clients. And I think as I've grown older, certainly since I left Vogue and then I set up the consultancy, and yesterday again is a good example, I could feel a bit shy yesterday. I haven't seen these people for a while. They were quite scary fashion people. Maybe they were much more senior to me. And yet yesterday, there we all were, all human beings, at a funeral of somebody we all hugely loved and respected. And I'm so glad that I'm still in touch with them and feel able to perhaps get in touch and say, I'm doing this now and can you be involved? Or some of the people from fashion who are in the book. I felt shy about calling on them, but you can be brave about that in the same way that you can be brave and kind of continually do what my father advises, which is keep people going, keep working on them.
Yeah, but there's also something in the first line that's about confidence. Do you think we can apply that to this next stage of our life about being kinder to ourselves, bolstering our confidence, being brave, and as we feel our ambition returning, believing that we can do something new and exciting?
Yes, I think we can. I think we need to be really good at reading the barometer of our confidence and being able to speak honestly and go, I'm not quite sure how to do this, and supporting each other. And I went to an event the other day to talk about the book, and we ended up talking about what I'm going to be doing next. And I wonderfully being invited to give lots of talks about the book and really try to engage conversations within businesses for women to talk about pre-children or during or post what they might need, and to open up these conversations to be curious and engaging rather than fearful and shame-filled and a bit frightened. HR are scared of talking about, in the wrong way, and women are frightened to admit that they might want to have children or whatever. And at my stage, it's amazing how many offers I'm getting to go and give talks about the book, but there's apparently no fee. And I have to say, I'm afraid this is my livelihood. I'd love to come and just talk to your business for free, but that's not, I can't afford to do that. I have a mortgage to pay. And I feel huge shame in saying that and in talking about money and talking to other women my sort of age about how they have now started doing something completely differently and talking about money and being really open about it and really clear about it. It's no surprise. And once you do say, I can't come if there's no budget, you can bet your life that they find budget. And so it's about being confident that what we are offering is valuable, and it is valuable because of our experience and what we have to offer.
I think for a lot of us, and your environment is quite an interesting one, it was, the media industry has changed so much, and sometimes we can't go back to what we were doing. What's your advice to someone where it's time for them to go exploring?
It's really, it's interesting. It's different for everybody. I think for me, it's about casting aside a sense of, I should know the answer. I should have a plan. I can't show vulnerability by saying, I'm not quite sure what to do with this now. When I was promoting the hardback of the book, I did a talk with David Gandy, the male model, and his former agent, Charles Casey, came to watch. And afterwards we, went for a drink to celebrate the event. And she said to me, please, will you write another book called How to Find the Ladder When You've Lost Sight of It? And I said, well, if you feel like you're floundering, why don't you work with me to help me publicize the paperback? And we could work together and you can kind of find your feet and get your confidence back and see, what happens next. So anyway, that's what we're doing. She's now my agent. But it's such an example. She kind of showed a sense of vulnerability, and within seconds of doing something, the
there was an
success is
opportunity.
yeah, exactly. So I think to talk to each other and sort of say, this is my doubt about myself. And then when somebody gives you a compliment, says, oh, this is how I see you. This is what I think you could do. Take it. People don't lie. People don't say nice things just to fill the air. Listen to people's perception of you and grow your next move from that, I think, could be one way of fueling your sense of yourself.
And I think that is also, women need to get better at reach out and joining each other all up.
Yes, and identify where the gaps are. There's a wonderful woman, June Angelides, who's a venture capitalist, but she's now setting up a thing to highlight the potential success in portfolio careers. She talks very openly about the different coaching she's had and the benefits of those different coaching, be it confidence before she goes on stage to make a speech, or how to monetize her skills and her talents. And for me, again, talking about money seems like I should just know how to earn it. I feel uncomfortable sort of talking about how do I monetize this? And people have just said to me, don't do things for free. And you kind of go, all right, yes, okay, that makes sense. And so asking for advice from the right people, identifying where your confidence gaps are, and finding the people who have filled those gaps or naturally didn't have those gaps, and not being afraid to ask the question.
And judgment is interesting. You're often judging yourself harsher than everyone else.
Yes. There's Julia Samuel is in the book, who's a very well-known psychotherapist, and she talks about the shitty committee in one's own head. And she says you just have to tell the shitty committee to just know their place, pipe down. Exactly. And once you sort of animate them, imagine the shitty committee in your head as a set of people who you really don't need in your life for this particular conversation, it's much easier to just kind of dial them down. And I think it's common to most humans, men and women, children, we all do have this sense of second guessing what the negatives might be about what we're doing. And it's never, ever helpful. Far better to tell yourself you're doing a good job, or if you're not sure, ask somebody else and listen to their answer on, their judgment of you.
I also were thinking about anxiety as we take these steps, and our bodies changing and feeling very hormonal sometimes, sleepless nights, all those things. And again, I read something about one of your little tricks when you get into bed. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Will you tell us about that?
It was from a therapist, actually. I was feeling just generally dreadful about myself for whatever reason it was at that time. Went to see a therapist, and I've done that intermittently throughout my life since my father died, but not constantly. And she said, why don't you list the achievements of the day when you go to bed at night? Small things, not, huge professional achievements, but you made your children laugh, or you cooked something that went well, or you changed the sheets and you're feeling comfortable in those tiny little incremental things. And once you list all of those, it's incredibly calming. If you take a moment to go, I did that and I did that and you sort of go, oh God, I'm doing really well, actually. I can stop panicking about what I haven't done and fill that space in my brain with the things that I have done. And it just slows down that shitty committee. It just dials the negative volume down.
And you're thinking about, going forward, you're thinking about possibly writing another book. Do you feel open about what's happening next? Do you have a view of where you're going?
There are various different avenues. There's a little bit of a portfolio career sort of developing. I've got some good conversations going on for a couple of different book ideas. The ultimate success for me is writing fiction. That's what I'm most scared of, because I think it'll be most difficult for me. But also this book has spawned so many conversations, and it's wonderful because people are often saying, God, I've never spoken about this before. And it tends to be in a group of women, and it's changing the way people are talking to their employers, and it's having an impact on people's careers. And one woman read it and got in touch with me via LinkedIn and said that she'd then given it as a present to her colleague who was going on maternity leave. This woman giving the book was the boss. And she said to her colleague who was going away to have her second baby, give me a ring when you've read the book and let me know if you want to talk about anything that's the book throws up. And so the employee did ring her, and she burst into tears and said, I feel like a fool. I wanted to ask for promotion before I went on maternity leave, but because I was having my second baby, I felt like it was mixed messages and I couldn't put myself up for promotion. So they had a long chat about all of the different themes in the book. And so as a result, she's been put up for promotion when she comes back. And stories like that make me feel massively validated, and that the book is going to land with women right when and where they need it. So I want to drive the book as much as possible to reach so many women feeling just guilty like I did when I first went back to work, or feeling not quite sure how to play it. So I don't want to stop promoting the book until it's got to all the women who need it.
And what piece of advice would you give to your 30-year-old self about where you are today?
The one I always think back to, which is most powerful, is that you can change your mind, I think. I thought that deciding to go back to work full time might be a terrible mistake, and I might do some irrecoverable harm. And I wish I'd just relaxed and said, it's fine, if it's wrong, you can change your mind. And secondly, I think that I wish I had goes back to my dad's advice, that every single person you ever meet is potentially going to be part of a future opportunity. So don't feel shy. Even if you haven't spoken to them for a while, they're still part of your network. And actually, I've really learned with the book that I've got back in touch with people I worked with years ago, thinking, oh God, perhaps they won't, is this odd? And everybody's always pleased. So I think from the very, very earliest point of your career, actually you're building a wonderful mental Rolodex of people who might roll into any future part of your life. And I could have been more confident with that in my life.
This season of the Wobbly Middle, as you know, is the women who bring us the sunshine. And I wanted to end on a sunny note in homage to Glamour magazine.
Yes.
So, mentally flick to the back of the magazine where they say, what's the one thing? So tell me your dream holiday.
My dream holiday. I was 50 at Christmas and we went to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. We've never done anything like that. It was spectacular. My dream holiday is sunshine and beautiful water and enough activities for my children to be happy doing so that I can lie back and read my book and eat good food.
And your summer read would be?
My summer read was, or at least last year I read, which I want everybody to read, God, I loved it, is The Correspondent, Virginia Evans. Absolutely wonderful.
It's on my list. And then finally, what's the one thing you wouldn't go on holiday without?
Gosh, it's a good question. I mean, a book, that is a holiday to me. Reading my book is, if I can get up, I tend to try and get up half an hour earlier than I need to so I can have a cup of tea and read my book in bed. If I do that, I tend to have a much better day than if I haven't had time to do it.
Going to try and do that myself. Thank you so much, Dolly. It's so lovely to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.